Thank you so much for coming. I'm Penny. I'm from Eisenhower Library, and we have Jeff Zentner and Jessie and Foley with us tonight to talk about censorship and banned books. And I'm really excited about this and thrilled that you came to talk about this topic. So they're more than willing to take your questions throughout. So feel free to put things in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try to just monitor both of those so that we can keep track of what's going on. I do want to do an introduction. Here we go. So you know who you're talking to. Jeff Zentner is the author of New York Times notable books, The Serpent King and In the Wild Light, as well as Goodbye Days and Rain and Delia's Midnight Matinee. Among other honors, he has won the ALA's William Morris Award, the Amelia Elizabeth Walden Award twice, the Muriel Becker Award, the International Literacy Association Award, and has been longlisted twice for the Carnegie Medal. He's a two-time Southern Book Prize finalist and was a finalist for the Indies Choice Award. He was selected as a Publishers Weekly Flying Start and an Indies Introduced pick. His books have been translated into 15 languages. Before becoming a writer, and this says he was a musician. I believe that you are probably still a musician who recorded with Iggy Pop, Nick Cave, and Debbie Harry, and he lives in Nashville and speaks fluent Portuguese, which is cool. I didn't know that about you until recently. Yeah, pretty neat. Jessie Ann Foley was a teacher before deciding to get her MFA in fiction writing at Columbia College in Chicago. And she does live in Chicago, for all of you Chicago people. Her books have been nominated for the Morris Award and the Prince Award. She has also been an Illinois Reader's Choice, the winner of the Maine North Star YA Award, and has been chosen several times as a Yalzer Best Books for the Year author. And Jessie, I'm saying this, your first novel, Carnival at Bray, was recently pulled from a shelf at the Alpine School District in Utah and is now temporarily restricted in a special section where the book must be requested. And you said it had also been banned in districts in Florida. I don't have too much more information about that. But I want to start this with a quote from Jeff, which is, "Hey, teenagers, pay close attention to the books people try to ban. Then make a beeline to read those books if you can. Find out for yourself why those people want that book banned. Find out for yourself if they can be trusted to know what's best for you." If you don't know, I'm going to throw a few statistics at you. I don't want to give you tons, but I want to give you a little bit, just so you know the state of book banning in the United States. From July 2021 to June of 2022, PEN America has been listing books that have been banned. And the list is now 2,532 instances of individual book bannings affecting 1,648 individual book titles. 75% of those are fiction. Almost 50% of those are young adult books. So for kids in grades, say 7 through 12. But it's also affecting chapter books, it's affecting picture books, it's affecting nonfiction. It's kind of running rampant across the country right now. 41% explicitly address LGBTQIA+ titles, and about 40% of those also are with protagonists or main characters or minor main characters of color. So with that information, and I have a lot more statistics if you want them later, just let me know. I got it here. I also have the 10 most challenged books for the year, which again, I am happy to give you if you so choose, but that's kind of boring. So I think we will just go instead and start to talk about book censorship and see where we are. So Jessie and Jeff, I'm leaving that open for you. So anything you want to say?
Well, I know you mentioned PEN America, Penny, which is that's actually how I found out that one of my books was banned in Utah, and then again more recently in Florida, because they track these things. They have an awesome website, and where it lists district by district which books are being banned where, and so they were the ones who alerted me to it. And now they're doing this like every couple months Zoom seminar with banned authors about what we can do as authors to try and fight back on this. So the next one I'm really looking forward to is at the end of September. But they're a really great organization, because the crazy thing is, and I'm always one of those people who's like, I'm closing my Twitter account. I can't handle it anymore. But I'm in this instance, I wouldn't have even known. And so that's kind of the scary part, is when these things happen, like in the cloak of darkness, even the authors themselves sometimes are not aware, and therefore can't do anything about it.
I think that's valid. It's not like they're suddenly calling you up and saying, hey, just want to let you know, we pulled your book off the shelf.
Right, exactly.
And let me say two things about that. The book of Jessie's that has been banned was a finalist for the Prince Award and a finalist for the Morris Award, both. Those are two of the highest honors that the American Library Association confers upon any young adult book. And the number of books that have been finalists for both is like infinitesimal. It's like probably less than 10. So this is unquestionably an extremely high quality book. It is an award-winning book. I've read it. I absolutely love it. I'm just in awe of Jessie's writing ability. It's an incredible book. That it has profound literary merit is undeniable. So I think that's really notable, that they're going after the sort of books that are most likely to make readers out of people, that are most likely to change hearts, that are most likely to reach people, the ones that are most well crafted. And I think that's very telling. It shows that there is a real anti-reading agenda behind all of this. The other thing too, and this kind of it's kind of spun off Jessie's point about authors not knowing sometimes when their books are banned. Two, there's this kind of popular idea that it's good for authors to have their books banned. Oh, it's great. It's gonna put you on the New York Times bestseller list. It's gonna be awesome. You should be so flattered. And no, it's not great. It's not. Most authors whose books are banned, their book just kind of quietly disappears from library shelves and classroom libraries, and they don't make it onto the bestseller list as a result of this. The only result of it is that kids don't have access to their books. The books that tend to get these big spikes in sales are the ones that are already popular. You'll hear about Mouse by Art Spiegelman getting banned here in Tennessee, where I live, and it rockets back to the top of the New York Times bestseller list. But that book is doing great. It was a Pulitzer Prize winner. Like, Art Spiegelman's doing great. People know where to find that book. Where I worry about the books that don't have as high a profile as your Mouses and your To Kill a Mockingbird and your, some of the other sort of usual suspects, or authors who don't have the kind of platform that like a John Green has, where he can go online and talk to 4 or 5 million people about the ban of his book Looking for Alaska, which, by the way, Prince winning book, another example of just a tremendously high quality book that they're seeking to ban.
And I think also another thing that I think sometimes people, like, I was talking to somebody at the library today, and he said, well, I would like a list of the banned books. And he said, oh, I read this one, and I read this one and this one, and I won't be able to get them again. And I think that that's sort of a misnomer that sometimes people have, that the book has been banned. That means it's been banned everywhere. And I think this is much more subversive in a way, that it's, it's just in this school district or in this town, or and it feels little, but it's not, it's big. So.
And one thing, Penny and I know you and I briefly talked about, is that you said the bans are sort of spiraling exponentially. And I think what's happening is these school boards and school districts, they don't even have to do the legwork anymore. All they have to do is look at a different district that has already banned this list and just do the same. And I know for a fact, just by looking on PEN America's website, where they listed my book along with a bunch of others that had been banned, that it was like they were just clearing the shelves, because they listed a bunch of so the Carnival at Bray came out in 2014. And like a bunch of other books that also came out in the same year were on the list. And so it's almost like you could see a pattern there, and I think we all can kind of assume that most of these people are not reading the books to begin with. Like, because they don't have the time nor the energy nor perhaps the intellectual I don't know, but yeah, I mean, it just, even when you look at the lists and you see that these books all came out in the same year, you can kind of tell that there was no thought put into this.
Mhm.
So
I think it's important to understand what is really happening here. And it's what Jessie said, there's sort of an element of virality now to this. And here's another thing that's happening. So there are two levels on which these book bans are happening. There's the level that the book banners are purporting to work on, is we want to protect children from objectionable material. So that's the first level. But if you dig down a little deeper, it is really about a much larger set of machinery. It's about grabbing control of the cultural narrative, because the cultural narrative has been continuing toward openness, toward greater acceptance, toward less marginalization of people. And it has been steadily marching in that direction, pretty much for our whole lifetimes. And you can't gerrymander that. You can't steal seats in the Senate and House and gerrymander that away. You cannot steal seats on a Supreme Court to decide that away. The only way you can try, well, there are two ways you can try to do it. The first is you can try to counter the narrative with your own stories. But if you're not good at writing stories, and if you lack empathy fundamentally, you're probably not. People who lack empathy generally tend to be really bad at writing stories. So they're not producing great stories. So if you're not producing the kind of stories that can counter the cultural narrative's direction or stop it or slow it, well, then what is your other option? Your other option is to simply try to take away the fuel for the cultural narrative. You have to try to starve it out, which, I mean, is books. Books are such incredible drivers of empathy. I mean, if you can leaf through a set of bound slices of wood pulp with squiggly black markings on them that make you feel things, you're a person of empathy, and it builds empathy. And that's a real concern if you're not able to create stories to counter those. So you've got to try to choke those off. It's the same thing. Like, if you can't win elections, then you've got to try to keep people from voting. It's the same thing. If you can't present ideas that are compelling to make people vote for you, and people don't vote for you, then you've got to try to stop people from voting. And it's the same thing going on here. It is fundamentally about cultural control and about trying to turn the tide of a narrative that has been marching toward giving power increasingly to people who haven't had power and people who have been invisible in American society. So I think it's really important to not assume that book banners are working in good faith and that they just want to protect the kids, because we know that's not true. Every day they take actions that show that they really don't care about kids on a number of levels. I mean, have your AR-15s. You don't need any sort of background check. If that's your position, you don't care about kids. You don't care about kids getting hurt, period. So I think it's really important not to meet book banners where they are and assume that they're acting in good faith, because they are fundamentally not.
Yeah.
I love that analogy about comparing it to trying to prevent people from voting, because like they make the same argument with that as, well, we have to protect the integrity of our vote because it's the foundation of our democracy. And it's like, there's absolutely zero evidence that there is that we have a problem with voter fraud. There is no proof. And so it's a completely bad faith argument, just like about protecting kids. And like you said, Jeff, many of the people on these school districts, when you look at their other politics surrounding children, it's just so clear that they don't care. And to go to your other point about, choking off this cultural narrative from kids in order to control them, I feel like that's one of the worst parts of this. And because a lot of these book bans are happening in places where it's probably extra hard to be a queer kid. Like
Right.
this is not happening in Manhattan. And I'm not trying to generalize, but sometimes where books are being taken off school shelves are the exact places where kids who are on the margins feel the most isolated. And I was a high school teacher for many years. And I remember in our hallway, in the English hallway, there was a quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald, and I don't remember the exact quote, even though I should, because I walk past it every single day. But it was something about like books are a way of telling us that we're not alone in our experience, that, just it's about, and I've had so many, I've had people ask me, because with my books, like, do you think that's too much for kids? And I'm like, no, because if I was let's say, for example, a teenage girl who experienced sexual assault, and I don't want to talk about it because I feel such shame. Shame happens in isolation. And when you have books that reflect your own experiences, even if they're negative, then that's a way of making you feel less shame. And when you feel less shame, you can feel more confident about living the life that you deserve and are entitled to live. So yeah, I really, I don't know. I like that analogy a lot, though, that we know that this is not about the kids.
That's so true. And two, it's not just about marginalizing kids, it's also about marginalizing the creators. So if you were here from the beginning of the panel, notice nobody talked about my books getting banned, and they haven't. I'm not, well, and maybe I'm just not aware of it, but I'm not aware of a single instance where somebody's tried to ban any of my books.
I've
And
looked, I looked and looked and looked, trying to find something, and I couldn't find anything.
yeah, and it's not that they don't deal with intense things, because they do. It's that I'm a straight white guy, and so I don't get it nearly as bad, period. I don't get it nearly as bad as queer creators, as creators of color, because my kind have been in power in this country. And again, like I said before, it's about reinforcing power structures and choking off attempts to change or upend those power structures.
Yeah, which again, if you look at just the fact that 40% at least are about LGBTQ, 40% are about kids of color. Yeah, it's just, that's exactly it. I think we talked about why the same things get hit over and over again. I think that's because a lot of people are just working off a list, right? I mean, it's like one-stop shopping. You just go and you pull it all off the shelf and you just say, hey, look.
There's so little thought going into it, really.
Very little, and very little reading going into it too, which we also sort of alluded to. Do either of you want to say anything about the Matt Krause list from Texas of the 750 books or whatever it was that he was pulling off, suggesting should be removed?
Well, one thing that was notable, again, notable to me about that list was just how utterly haphazard it was.
It was like someone typed
throwing
darts into a search bar, and
yeah, it was just utterly haphazard. An utterly baffling list, really, again, heavily weighted toward LGBTQ books, heavily weighted toward books that humanize people of color, that humanize the Black experience, the immigrant experience, all of that. I mean, just it's such a naked attempt to try to stop humanization of people through books.
And I should say, if you don't know what that list is, that was political, I don't know if he's senator or a representative from Texas, list that he made up that said that these are the books that you should pull off of your shelves in all of the schools in Texas. So you can look it up if you are intrigued. It's very long.
And another thing, so he was kind of part of a growing movement in America called the parents' rights movement. And I will give this to the people who are on the side of book banning. They're very good at branding. They're extremely good at political messaging. This is what they've done for years and years and years. Lee Atwater, Grover Norquist, Karl Rove. They're really good at political messaging, and so they've come up with this phrase, parental rights, which sounds great. Like who's going to be against parental rights? But it is really a smokescreen for just precisely this, book banning, making sure that your kids are not exposed to art that challenges power structures, that humanizes people, and that's all that is. And again, I think it's important to call out bad faith where we see it, and to recognize things for what they are and see through smoke screens.
And
There's
then,
a couple of, oh, go ahead, Jessie, but there's a couple of things in the Q&A after that. So yeah, we can address them in a second.
yeah, I just wanted to say, so like what Jeff, you're saying about the parental rights, I was thinking about this when I was getting ready for our panel today, and I was thinking about how I wonder if I'm curious what you guys think, if there's a relationship between the COVID pandemic and what's happening with book banning now, because, in 2020, there were these fights about the masks, we were homeschooling, and we were totally reconfiguring the way that kids are educated. And all of a sudden, parents, and also parenting style has just changed so much in the last few decades, where parents are so much more involved in their kids' day-to-day schooling. And there's this sense that, well, it's my kid, you're not going to tell me what they can or cannot do. And I mean, you're absolutely right, Jeff. Like, who would disagree that a parent should be the final authority on what's best for their kids? But so just to give you an example, so I was listening to this video on TikTok about a school librarian, and she in her school library had a display of banned books, and the principal got one complaint from one parent and came to her and said, you have to take this down. And she said, no, I'm not taking this down. This is part of our standards as librarians. I am the authority on this at our school, and I'm not taking it down. And in the TikTok, she was crying, and she was saying, I'm probably going to get fired over this. And she said, but when she came back to the principal and said, I have 700 students in this school, and you want me to take down an entire display because of one kid, one parent? And so it's not about parental rights, because if she had capitulated to that, then 699 other kids would have lost that opportunity because of one parent for their own child. And there's just been sort of a cultural shift, I feel like, and it's almost like this combative relationship towards teachers and educators, that it's like we're coming at where it used to be, back a couple generations ago, the polar opposite, where it's like the teacher is always right, you do what they say, and I don't want to hear about it. And now it's I don't like this thing for my own child, so I am going to try and force it upon 700 kids in the school. And so it's I just wonder if there's any relationship between the anti-mask, and you're not going to make my kid wear it, and I'm not going to do this, and I'm not going to do that, and this exponential increase in book banning.
I think the increase in book banning is definitely one front in a multi-front war on education, period. I think education has fallen out of favor with a significant segment of American society, because education demonstrably results in different voting patterns, period. You can prove it. And so the people who don't like education are the ones who prefer political candidates who fall on the wrong side of those voting patterns when people become educated. So part of the war on education is book banning. Part of it is refusing to take any actions that would make schools safer. So whether from mass gun violence, whether from COVID, things like that. Part of it is these laws imposing limits on what teachers can say in classrooms, in curricula, what they can teach, what sort of history they can teach. You even see it with anger about forgiveness of student loans. Like, people want education to hurt. They want education to be a hardship. They want only a certain type of person to be able to access education. And it's not the kind of person who's got to be able to take out loans to access an education. So it's a multi-front war. And I think there is right now an open war on teachers in this country.
All right, this doesn't have anything to do with either of that, but I would like to hit these questions. Well, the first one is for Jessie, which is, what was your book about and why do you think they banned it?
So my book takes place in 1994. There's the main character lives in Chicago with her mom. Her mom gets into a whirlwind relationship with a man, and they decide to move to Ireland, where he's from. The main character has an uncle that she idolizes, who's a big Nirvana fan. And so the uncle is a drug addict. There's two sex scenes in the book. There's suicide. But the two sexual experiences in particular, one of them is very negative, and one of them is positive. And I don't think they like that either. They don't like sex positive, because, but for me, I don't think I write, and I know, and I'm such a huge fan of Jeff's work too. And I don't think any of us write gratuitously about anything. So for me, it was sort of showing a parallel between one girl's first sexual experience, that showed, I thought, sort of like a nuance in a first sexual experience, and that it wasn't assault necessarily, but it was a girl thinking that once she started something, she had to finish it because that's what you're supposed to do. And so, but the irony is, and this goes back to what Jeff was saying earlier about, like, it's not actually a badge of honor for authors to be banned. So in my particular case, so when I found out the book was banned, and I made a couple posts about it, but the next thing you know, it completely sold out in every bookstore and on Amazon, and it's only available on Audible now. But part of the reason for that is because it was published with a very small publisher who has since closed up shop. And so right now I have the rights to the book, and it's sort of in limbo. And it was kind of, we were kind of looking for a new home for it. And now I feel like the irony is it probably will get a new home, and that's much more likely to happen now because of these book bans. But again, it still doesn't feel good because it's like, I'm going to be fine, but I think, because I have gotten many messages about what that book has meant to people. And so now it's really not a good feeling at all.
Related to what Jessie was saying about writing difficult things with nuance, books do need to deal with difficult matters. Books do need to deal with upsetting matters. And I'll say this, there is a really troubling meme or trend, and this occurs even among people who I think would consider themselves on the right side of social justice, on the right side of history. The idea that depiction of something is endorsement of that thing in a book, and that to put that thing in the book is to endorse it. I think that is an incredibly harmful idea. I think that if you consider yourself as being on the right side of social justice issues and against book banning, but you endorse the idea that depiction of something in a book equals endorsement of that book, just know that you're giving fuel and helping to feed bad faith narratives, because that's where a lot of these bad faith approaches to book banning come from. Oh, if we show kids using drugs, kids are going to want to, it's an endorsement of kids using drugs. No, it's not. It's showing how the world is and showing ways that teenagers can move through the world and making teenagers feel less alone and dealing with difficult issues. So I think that authors need to be able to have the space to depict difficult things and work through difficult things without having people accuse them of endorsing those things. And I saw a question in the Q&A that kind of speaks to that. I'm a high school librarian, and the scary thing is that intimidation tactics are being used now to try to ban books such as criminal complaints, online harassment, and threats of violence. You know, a librarian in Illinois who had to deal with a complaint to the FBI that she was grooming students by having certain so-called pornographic books in the library. How do you react to this escalation? So a lot of my professional career and my day job was spent as a litigator. I was a lawyer. I was a prosecutor for a number of years. I was a civil litigator. And the way you react to that is you fight back forcefully, and you do not let them control the narrative. You do not let them shift the center of gravity of the vocabulary, of the conversation. You know, if I have to remind people, when I was a prosecutor, I prosecuted 4 or 5 pastors for sexual abuse of children. I prosecuted 0 teachers, 0 librarians, 0 children's book authors, 0 drag performers, 0 transgender people. So we have to respond forcefully. We have to respond energetically. We have to respond with facts and never, ever, ever give up. I mean, we gotta fight back. We cannot ever let this slide. I get furious at the groomer accusations because it is so utterly hypocritical.
And the other thing, yeah, and I feel like what you were saying about how this is not an endorsement of any particular behavior. First of all, one thing that I've seen on the author side of this, and this comes from both edges of the political spectrum, is that some YA authors feel like they need to write books now with an extremely clear moral stance. And that it almost becomes like a simplification of characters and stories, because it has to almost like hit the reader over the head in what I find sometimes like a condescending way, because you're going to get attacked from one side or the other if you show any sort of moral gray area, which is where almost all of us live, to be honest. And, you know, like, I just find it so disingenuous that people think like, oh, if kids read about this behavior in books, they're going to go and do it, when it is so easy for kids to access porn to the point where studies have shown. There's a great book called Girls and Sex by Peggy Orenstein about how kids are exposed to sex through pornography at such a young age, before they're exposed to it through conversations with their parents, their families, or through literature, that when they go to have sexual experiences, those are often colored by what they think that it's supposed to be like based on the porn that they've watched. And so, like, if you're not counteracting that with realistic depictions of sexuality, then that's going to continue to happen, because it's the cat's out of the bag, or I don't know what that saying is, but I mean, you can't put, what is it? I'm so bad with these cliches.
I always say you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Oh, that's good.
Put the toothpaste back in the tube. Thank you, Jeff. You know, and so, like, I just find it so crazy that you're just going to act like, well, I didn't raise my child to look at that stuff. Well, guess what? You know, if you're not going to teach them, you know, they're still going to learn about it somewhere. And at least we can counteract that with a different way, but not if these books are being taken off the shelves.
Right. And what you said, Jeff, earlier, for that first question, I'm a senior citizen. I have read Genderqueer and Heather Has Two Mommies and see nothing bad about them. Are there any lawsuits against these book bannings? I understand we can contact our legislators. What else can we do? And I think you sort of already addressed that, but if there's anything else you'd like to add to that, that would be great.
Oh, so here's another front in the war on education: school boards. The same people who are banning books are very energetically seeking spots on school boards.
Yes.
And They're very politically engaged. They show up at meetings, and we have to show up. We have to fight. We have to get seats on school boards. We have to not cede that to them. So we can do that. As far as lawsuits against book bans, I mean, that's pretty tricky. There's not a lot you can do. I think there are some defamation lawsuits brewing against folks who have been using the groomer accusation a little too promiscuously, which I'm glad to see that. I think defamation lawsuits can be very useful. Just ask Dominion Voting Machines and Newsmax, or Mike Lindell and Mr. MyPillow. But I don't think lawsuits are the most effective tool against these book bans. I think continuing to show up in the marketplace of ideas, continuing to fight forcefully, continuing to be politically engaged, and voting at every level. Local elections are so important here. I mean, they are so deeply important. Running for office, just all of those things, I think, are ultimately going to be more effective. And then just continuing to spread the truth about books, continuing to evangelize books and be advocates for books, and prepare yourself to speak eloquently about books that are the targets of bans, and know them well, and understand what's in them, and understand the context around the reasons why people are trying to ban them. That's what I got.
Yeah. And I was just having this conversation with a friend recently that, like there's this stereotype about the librarian that there are these quiet little, like, shh, quiet in the library, and that they're these very like wallflower type of people, when in fact, they're being threatened. They are fighting for our First Amendment rights. They're sort of at the forefront of this fight for intellectual freedom, and they're revolutionaries, and but it's really frightening, because I know, like in our local area, Jeff, so there's this suburb of Chicago called Downers Grove, where they were supposed to host like a drag bingo or something.
Yeah, it was for teens. Drag bingo for teens.
Drag bingo for teens. Thank you,
Right.
Penny. And they were, they got all this pushback, not a lot, a very vocal minority of pushback. And, they pushed right back, but then they started getting threats. And because they felt like they couldn't keep a safe space for their teens at an event like this, they had to cancel it. And so, those tactics, those dirty tactics, they work, because at the end of the day, if the library doesn't feel like they can protect their patrons from violence, then, so
Right.
then this event got canceled.
And so many of those, a lot of those, they'll find out later when they go through and they actually check and find out where the threats came from, aren't even in the state,
No,
that's happened, that they're just, but it's that level of fear and that level of intimidation it makes you have to really think twice about what you're doing. I mean, even if the event goes on, you still have to think twice about what you're doing. So.
Right.
There's a couple more questions, which is, when it comes to banned books, do you think that some individuals ban books because it's good to have one opinion over the other?
I mean, I'm not totally sure I understand the question, but I don't really accept many explanations for trying to ban books as being in good faith. I think they are almost uniformly in bad faith. And so any sort of high-minded explanation you try to offer, I'm not going to buy. Any sort of pure motive you try to offer, I'm just not going to buy it. I just don't. I really don't. Because when you look at what people who are trying to ban books will let go past, I'll draw upon my my deeply religious upbringing and and how Jesus said you strain at gnats, but you swallow camels. They're straining at gnats, but swallowing camels. So you're never going to come up with what I would consider a good faith rationalization for any of this that would satisfy me. You just won't. There's too much of a history behind this. There's too much context. There's too much going on behind the scenes and under the surface. Yeah.
And then there was one other, just this is more of a comment than anything, which is that the parents who are supporting bans are actually abandoning their parental responsibilities to talk with their children about these books and why they find them problematic or offensive, because they, of course, haven't read or researched them themselves. For example, Harry Potter is a morality tale, which they would know if they'd read even a little bit of it. And I don't know if there needs to be a response, but that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, because it's difficult to talk to your kids about difficult things.
Sure.
It's hard because they don't want to listen a lot of the times, because it's awkward for everybody involved, but that is your responsibility as a parent. So yeah, I see the irony completely.
Yeah. So I just want to ask, because I read so many things where kids write to authors and say, your book did this for me. If you've had people send you notes or emails or texts or whatever you're getting from them, and what those have sort of said, how those have affected you, or how those have affected your writing even.
Yeah, I have gotten some, particularly with my most recent YA novel, which is called You Know I'm No Good, because that is about a girl who gets sent to a therapeutic girls boarding school for troubled teens. And a lot of it sort of interrogates the question of what does troubled mean? And, like there's a socioeconomic, there's a gender aspect to it, there's a racial aspect to it. And again, there's some pretty heavy sexual stuff in there. And so I've gotten a lot of messages, and I've talked to girls who were sent to these kind of boarding schools, and it's been a really just humbling kind of experience that because we all read books, we're all readers, but just whenever anyone takes the special time out to like look up my website and send me an email or send me a DM or something, it really shows that it affected them, and it's such a it never gets old.
Yeah, I've gotten a number of them. My first book deals with kind of grief and poverty and religious fundamentalism. So I hear from a lot of readers who have dealt with those things. It takes place in a rural area. Same with my fourth book, In the Wild Light. So I hear readers tell me that they're not used to seeing themselves depicted with dignity and their lives depicted with dignity and intelligence. So I hear from those readers. I've dealt with grief and mental illness in my books, depression, OCD, anxiety. So I hear from readers on that. I think one of the most poignant messages I ever received, I got a message on Twitter from a young man named Brandon, who actually read The Serpent King when he was in jail. Just had nothing else to do, and there's a copy of The Serpent King. I don't know how it got there, but I'm glad it did. And he said that it turned him into a reader, which was really amazing. And he said he just identified so deeply with the character's kind of struggles with his faith and trying to come to some sort of a good place with God. And he related to that, and that was really moving to me. I would say probably once a week I get a letter or a message of some kind from a reader that all by itself would be enough to sustain me for my whole writing career. It's just, readers are incredible, and especially young adult readers. I mean, I got into this because I volunteered at a music camp for teenagers, and I saw how just tremendously open-hearted teenagers are, and how deeply art can influence them and can affect them and can um, open their minds and their hearts to the wonder of the world. And I wanted to create art for young adults. And this, by the way, coming full circle, this is why people want to ban books, because art is so uniquely powerful to young adults, because the relationships you form with the art that you love as a young adult are so uniquely powerful, and they don't want you forming that relationship with art that will cause you to see people they don't like in a good light, you know, or to more generally go through life as an empathetic person, as a person who sees nuance in the world and who sees gray areas and doesn't live in a world of black and white morality, and learns to think about things and question things. And all of that is bad for authoritarianism, and book banning is sort of the quintessential act of authoritarianism. That's why we see Hitler's Third Reich burning books. That's why every fascist movement has been a book banning movement.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I think also, I'm just thinking about this as you're talking, Jeff, is that like there's such a difference between, and I still like the art, especially the music that I listened to when I was a teenager. It's like it's in my soul and always will be. And same with the books that I read. But the interesting thing is that there's such a big difference a lot of the times between the novels that are assigned in high school classes, English classes, versus the novels in the libraries that are getting banned, you know. And I think sometimes a lot of this has to do with underfunding of our schools, because, you know, when I was a public school teacher, yeah, sure, there were all sorts of novels that I wanted to teach, but guess what? We had a book room with books that were dusty and 20 years old, and that's what you had to choose from. And so for a lot of kids, you know, that are reading like The Catcher in the Rye, The Lord of the Flies, you know, like those kind of classic books, which I like those books, but then it's like they're missing out then on the opportunity to get more contemporary novels with more portrayals of diversity. And it's just like, and then we wonder why so many kids don't like to read, because I'm sorry, kids aren't gonna like, they might not even like, I mean, I'm just trying to think of all the books that I hated that I read in high school, which is pretty much all of them.
Yeah,
The ones
right.
that I read for class, but then I loved to read outside of class. And so like, but then you have these same book banners who are getting all, you know, up in a twist about, well, let's maybe not teach Shakespeare, only Shakespeare. Let's mix it up a little bit, you know? So it's just so interesting to me. I don't know.
There's a short story by Connie Willis. I just thought of it because you mentioned Shakespeare, and she writes science fiction mostly, but this is about it's a story where they're going to teach Shakespeare in school, and the kids are so excited because they're going to get Shakespeare. But first it has to go through this committee and that committee and this committee and these people who don't want this, and you have to take out this part and you have to remove this part and you have to take this out. And when they finally get to the point where they actually get to read Shakespeare, it's like 3 lines long because everything else has been removed because somebody complained about something. And it's sort of that same kind of a feeling, you know? It's just, it's easy.
And a lot of Shakespeare is nothing but sex and violence. So,
Yeah. Very true.
I mean, we have Romeo and Juliet, 13, 14 years old, you know,
Yeah.
but that's okay. Because that has literary merit.
Yeah. Yeah. Last thing, let's just talk about if the censorship efforts continue. Okay, first, do you see it dropping off in any time soon, which I really don't, but you might. And how do you think it's going to affect the kids that are in middle school now, the kids that are in grammar school now? You know, if this keeps going on, it seems like it's very bad to use a simple word. It's very evil. It's very bad. I don't know. Do we want to talk about that at all? And just before, and then sort of, again, if you want to get, you did a great job, Jeff, on what we can do. If there's anything else that you would like to add to that before we close out, we have about 6 minutes, 7 minutes left.
Well, I think these efforts are going to continue. I think they're going to ramp up, because again, this is something you can't gerrymander. You can't steal Supreme Court seats. You just have to keep going. I do think these efforts are destined to fail. I think you cannot suppress the better story. I think the better story will always win out. But my concern is not that ultimately we'll lose this cultural war, because they've been trying for a long time unsuccessfully. My concern is that the unnecessary casualties we'll have along the way. The kids who will be denied the opportunity to experience these larger worlds. And that is a loss. I mean, there will certainly be lost battles, and those lost battles are a bad thing. And so my optimism that we will ultimately win and that they won't win isn't like a sunshiny Pollyanna optimism. It's a we're going to win this, but it's going to be a bloody, ugly fight for the soul of a nation. Not to get too hyperbolic, but I think that's truly what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I tell myself, I try to be somewhat optimistic about it as well, because I tell myself, you see, like, if you've been around long enough, you see like the ups and downs of like these cultural wars. Like I remember back when like the CDs would have parental advisory explicit lyrics, and that was spearheaded by Tipper Gore, a Democrat. And of course I remember saying like, well, that's the CD that I'm buying because it's got explicit lyrics and I want to know what that's about. And then of course, you could buy a t-shirt that said parental advisory, explicit lyrics, and then that went away. And now, but I think the difference is now is that we all live in such strong echo chambers, and we don't, we're so polarized a lot of times geographically, that, we all think that everyone around us thinks the same way we do, because we live in these increasingly red or blue areas. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, and one of the ways when I was a kid, I didn't travel very much anywhere. And so the way that I learned about other places was through reading. And Jeff, I know, like, one of the things that I love that you write about is you write about poor kids, and you write about kids who haven't been, in these sophisticated places. And so I think for many, many kids, the best way for them to learn about others and different experiences is through reading. And I just the harm of taking that away from them, I think we're going to continue to see. I wish I had solutions, but I don't know if I do, but I just do hope that they'll push it too far, and then there'll be sufficient pushback. I guess we're just gonna have to see.
Someone has put in, I know there's not much time, but other than the fact that people want to control young adults and the way we think, why do you think they control what we read? It's almost as if they fear what we're capable of doing if we have more knowledge about what's not acceptable in this time and age. I think that's really a really smart question.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think you've answered the question in the question. That is exactly what they're afraid of.
Yeah. And then for the other question, which is, will this be available? We are recording it. It should be up, and I'm going to tell you it's going to be on the library's Facebook page, but it might be on the library's YouTube page, but it may take a day or two to get posted. Just So that's, that, we know that. So we have like, I'm looking at my watch, 4 minutes left. Is there anything that we would like to say as like last words before we close out? Or are there any other questions? Oh, yes, there is another question, perhaps. No, that's the same one I just talked to. Never mind, forget that one.
I wrote down some notes and they're completely illegible. Conversation, so. I was writing while not looking at the paper. I don't miss anything.
Well, then you
so.
just have to remember, I guess, what you wrote. So anything else that, you know, we would like to throw out there?
I just want to say, and we've discussed this some tonight, but those who are doing this are a very noisy, very small group. This is a noisy minority, and we need to be a noisy majority and drown them out. We need to make noise. We need to really fight for this, and not assume that somebody else will do the fighting, not assume that they'll just go away. So so remember that we outnumber the zealots.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's good. All right. I think that's it. Thank you so very, very much for this. I think it was really valuable and I thoroughly enjoyed listening to you. Thank you for coming. And yes, again, it should be up on the library website soon. And I'm going to go ahead and end us. Thank you both. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you
It
for
was
having
great
us. This
talking
was
to you guys.
wonderful.
Yeah, it was.
Bye.
Bye-bye.